The story of Laban and Jacob reads a lot like Old Testament bingo. The threat of fratricide or killing one's own brother, check. A dowry, check. Casual slavery, check. Incest, check. The gang's all here. I think it's easy in our modern day and theological context to look at these Old Testament stories and scoff, to stomp our feet, roll our eyes, and say, what does this have to do with me? A reaction that I believe is more than valid. However, the answer to that question, what does it have to do with me, is actually everything. Because these difficult Old Testament stories have all to do with the spiritual formation of the West and its ideologies. What has been permitted and allowed to exist as natural law, as human nature. The story of Laban and Jacob is ultimately a story of ownership and possession, with the entire premise being summed up with a rather caveman flourish of, me want cousin. Without consulting his human daughters, Laban cleverly indentured another man into servitude to purchase his property, which was another human being. A human being that Jacob, a man who allegedly loved this woman, Rachel, so much that on the first night, he couldn't even tell the difference between the two sisters. Laban managed to get rid of both of his daughters over the course of this epic 14-year love story, and everyone wins. In 2010, Paul Bloom, a Yale researcher, set off to understand the moral life of babies and found that babies as early as 3 months showed moral development. The quote is, "Our experiments show that infants as young as 3 months of age evaluate others on the basis of their social behavior toward third parties. Our findings also provide the first evidence to our knowledge of a negativity bias in infants this young. Our subjects revealed an aversion to antisocial actors, but not an independent attraction to prosocial actors. This developmental pattern suggests that negative social information is developmentally privileged in influencing social preferences, and adds to the recent literature on the early development of negativity bias." In other words, even babies don't like jerks. And selling your daughters off, subjecting them to systems of oppression and suffering, just kind of seems like a jerk move. So does stealing your brother's birthright over some lentils and not being able to tell which sister is which on the night of consummation. I say this to challenge the common excuse, it was a different time. Because despite different social ideals, expectations, and values, at the end of the day, we are all human. We were all babies once, with hearts geared towards justice, which, according to the literature, looks like God just put in us at the beginning. There should be an innate discomfort when it comes to owning another human being or seeing another as property. You should be uncomfortable with the deceit, the lying, the fooling of relatives for personal gain. It is an inversion of the natural human spirit. Ownership, possession, property, these ideas buck against the fabric of the kingdom of heaven discussed in the parable of the sower. I hearken to Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. The wealth in the field, I imagine, was not gold, silver, or oil, but the essence of fertility. Black, dark earth, ripe with the potential for the creation of shared abundance. In this field is the fruit that can yield the utopian future dictated in Scripture: equality, freedom, love for all. What I'm describing, this utopia, is also someone's dystopia, an anathema to their vision of flourishing. For many, they have decided that they cannot flourish without the suffering of others, the despoilment of the sacred, and ownership, possession, and subjugation of all things. I see parallels in the story of Laban and Jacob to this country's own history with ownership of human bodies. From transatlantic chattel slavery to the encomienda system of the Southwest, the selling of human bodies as a means to consolidate power, the constant promise of eventual freedom and a reward mired in loopholes. After all, how are you going to give 40 acres of stolen land and a creature that can't procreate as compensation for a genocide? The human body is and was the first form of capital. And what I said earlier about these stories mattering, it's because many of the historical figures we know were informed by these theologies that normalize these things as good, godly, and normal. George Washington owned slaves. Alexander Hamilton owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Andrew Johnson. The ancestors of this country we revere are the same as the stories we revere. An unrepentant excuse to forgive or even validate certain behaviors. This is not a cautionary tale. It is a show of strength, ownership, and domination. The actions of Jacob are supposed to be admirable. He's clever and slick and smart, just as the actions of Abraham and the successor of Jacob, Joseph, were also supposed to be admirable. These figures, yes, are human. Yes, they have flaws, as they should. But they are arguably, mostly, in my opinion, deeply unpleasant. These are the ancestors of Christian nationalism. We are currently seeing the impact of Christian nationalism across the West, and especially in the United States. We see it in our current legislation as dominionists, those who seek to put man above the natural world, as decreed in Genesis, destroy sacred mountains, monuments, and defile fertile earth for wealth and gain, such as we are seeing with Chaco Canyon. Yet, like the figures named, we continue to make excuses for and explain away abusive ideas for our own comfort. I think Paul actually meant to say, I think Jacob didn't mean to. We see gleeful transphobia and homophobia, and we see virulent racism draped in crosses because a chosen people deserve their chosen land, free of undesirables, free of weeds in the soil and yeast in the flour. While it certainly never stopped, lynchings have really increased in 2026 alone. Nolan Wells, 18 years old, found July 6th with blunt force trauma in Mississippi and also a removed neck area. Daryl Lowry, 13 years old, July 23rd, stabbed and drowned in North Carolina. Lone Hartman, July 22nd, neck sliced open at a musical festival in Petoskey, Michigan. Gerard J. Jackson, June 30th, found hanging in a tree at a music festival, Rothbury, Michigan. Juliana Nzita, May 8th, 16 years old, found hanging in front of a black church, Charlotte, North Carolina. Lorenzo Salgado Arrujo, 52 years old, July 7th, killed by ICE. Joan Sebastian Guerrero, 25, July 13th, killed by ICE. Just last night, I had to go back and write this in. A 17-year-old black child was shot and murdered by the cops for reaching for his water bottle in Austin, Texas. They put 20 rounds in him and claimed it was suicide by cop. And the comments on social media for all these instances are filled with Christians celebrating their deaths, talking about how they are thugs, hoodlums, un-American, and ungodly. And it doesn't just stop there. Just a few weeks ago, I attended a hearing about the construction of a new masjid, an Islamic place of worship, on Alameda and 2nd Street. What started as a run-of-the-mill meeting quickly descended into hate-filled vitriol directed at our Muslim brothers and sisters. They called Allah a principality of the devil. They claimed that Christians would end up dead if they built the masjid. They claimed Sharia law would take over. They would have to hide our women and children because they claimed our neighbors were rapists and murderers. Many hateful people sneered, shouting, "I'm not afraid of you," at our Muslim brothers and sisters. Muslim women were being harassed in the bathroom in the courthouse. And what did they tell us after every poisonous word in that microphone? Christ is king. Those same people who profess the kingship of Christ pulled a gun on a priest who spoke up in favor of his Muslim neighbors having the right to worship on July 24th here in Albuquerque. While all this is happening, do you know what I still hear? How do we hold space for our fellow believers? How do we show people that not all Christians are like that? How do we reach out to bridge the gap? Gap. It's more like a chasm with the pits of hell at the bottom of it. Because too many people, this is not just a difference of opinion, something that they can be convinced out of with debate and scholarship. This is holy war. It is a matter of life and death. They fully believe their soul and your soul are on the line. And they will do anything, and I mean anything, to make their kingdom of heaven. We are the weeds. We are the bad fish. We are the poor soil and bramble and brush, because their kingdom is more real than our kingdom. Racism, racial violence, it is a ritual of Christian nationalism, which operates on an us versus them binary. Do we say what we always say? That it's a product of its time? How many years has it been a product of its time? I must wonder if Leah and Rachel said the same thing to one another. I know it's unfair, sister, but it's just how Father is. You know he's a product of his time. I must reiterate, if a baby knows it's wrong to treat others that way, what is the excuse here? I hear more people concerned with the perception of Christendom as a whole, with making sure everyone is making nice, that they are not focused on those who are most harmed by the ideologies that emerge from texts such as this. It seems to me people are genuinely unconcerned for our most marginalized, that they would rather spend hours in a meeting deliberating verbiage. It is a privilege to choose ineffectuality in the face of great harm. It is a privilege to choose passivity while others are being brutalized. I encourage you, however, to love your neighbor wholeheartedly. Love your neighbor as much as Camilo Torres Restrepo, a Colombian Catholic priest who loved his neighbor so much he died in the process fighting for their liberation. Now, who does that sound like? Who else loved the world so much they died in an attempt to free the minds of a world mired in empire and ownership? The kingdom of heaven, theologically being a place that is attainable on earth, is something that many black believers have given up on. In many black churches, you will hear the emphasis on heaven. You will hear the emphasis on dying, the afterlife, even the rapture. Because undergirding that theology is a fundamental belief that this, down here, will never change. It will never get better. Because it's been 500 years of oppression for us, and they're rolling back rights as we speak. The only release from these systems, from the violence inflicted by Christian nationalism and white supremacy, the cross burning, calling rap music and jazz demonic, banning African religion legally, which, by the way, the ban on African diasporic religion was only just lifted this last May, and the law was passed in the 1700s. The only release from the inescapability of all of this is death. It is the deliverance of heaven promised by Christ. I no longer want to live in a world with the same systems that made my ancestors give up. I do not want to be forced to smile and pray and hope. The people that pray to a God who revels in conquest and bloodshed and a Christ who rejects the foreigner, the downtrodden and outcast, have a sudden change of heart. We deserve better than this. We deserve better than to be so powerless. We deserve to see this kingdom. We deserve to see mutual flourishing and collective betterment of all loving people. Because it all comes back to ownership, to possession. Many people care more about the possession of the Christ as if it's a thing, an item, missing the point that it's an action. How are we loving our neighbor? Do we only claim to love our neighbor? Do we turn the other way when our neighbor in the back begs for help as our neighbor in the front tortures them? Do we remain neutral? Do we immediately forgive the aggressor and hold the victim to the same standard? The seeds have been placed into the earth, but the soil is poisoned. The fish have been caught, but the water is sick. How can any believer properly form when our foundation is soaked in the blood of the innocent? We must invite the purifying fire at the end of time into the now. For it is not the fires of some eternal damnation, but the fires of redemption, the fires of rebirth. The kingdom of heaven is like a chalice, tempered endlessly, being put in and out of flame, hammered. Through pain, through endurance, through effort, through never giving up, one day we will hold living water. Hard edges will be smoothed out. Metal will shine as clearly as glass. This world could perhaps be beautiful. Do you believe that? Do you believe that this world is worth saving? Do you believe that your neighbors are worth saving? Do you believe you are worth saving? And let the people say amen.